Two men were stabbed to death in the middle of a street in Atlanta. The police found blood from one of the victims inside a limousine. The limousine belonged to one of the most famous athletes in America. That athlete was never convicted of murder. The murder weapon was never found. The white suit the athlete was wearing that night, a suit that would almost certainly have had blood on it, was never found. And to this day, more than 25 years later, nobody has been convicted of killing Jacinth Baker and Richard Lollar. Two men are dead. Three men went to trial. All three walked free, and the case is still officially unsolved. This is the Ray Lewis story that never went away. Ray Lewis is widely considered the greatest middle linebacker in NFL history. 13 Pro Bowls, 2 Super Bowl championships, 2 Defensive Player of the Year awards, a first ballot Hall of Famer in 2018. But before all of that, before the Super Bowl MVP, before the second championship, before the Hall of Fame speech, there was the night of January 31st, 2000 in Atlanta, Georgia. Hours after Super Bowl 34, E. Lewis and a group of friends got into an altercation outside a club in Atlanta's Buckhead neighborhood. Within minutes, two men, Richard Lollar and Jacinth Baker, were dead in the street, both stabbed multiple times. What followed was one of the most complicated, most covered, and most unresolved legal cases in the history of professional sports. This video does not claim to know what happened in those 90 seconds. The courts could not determine that. What this video does is lay out exactly what is known, what is missing, and why, in after 25 years, the questions have never fully gone away. January 31st, 2000, Atlanta, Georgia, Super Bowl weekend. Ray Lewis and his group, 6 men and 4 women, had spent the night at the Cobalt Lounge in Buckhead. Around 3:30 in the morning, they began walking back to their rented Lincoln Navigator limousine. A group of men from Akron, Ohio, including Jacinth Baker and Richard Lollar, crossed paths with Lewis's group. Words were exchanged. According to Lewis, Lollar shouted an insult. Baker, who stood just 5 feet 3 inches tall, stepped forward and confronted Lewis directly. Lewis says he shoved Oakley into the limo to defuse the situation. Oakley leaped back out. Baker smashed a champagne bottle over Oakley's head. This is one of the few elements of the night that all parties agree on, and chaos erupted. What happened in the next 90 seconds is where the accounts diverge completely. About 90 seconds after the altercation began, Baker was lying in a pool of his own blood, dying from a stab wound that pierced his heart. Lollar was nearby, dead from a stab wound to his heart. Lewis and the rest of the men piled back into the limo. As it pulled away, one of the victim's friends began firing a gun at the departing vehicle. At some point during this drive, the limo stopped at an unidentified location, and an individual got out and dumped a bag. One witness described it as a hotel laundry bag. Another called it a brown paper bag, into a trash bin. That bag was never recovered, its contents were never confirmed, and Ray Lewis's white suit was never found. Here is what investigators confirmed in the days after the killings. Blood from one of the victims was found inside Lewis's limousine. That is documented. That is not disputed. A small folding knife was found near the bodies. That knife was traced back to a Sports Authority store in Gwinnett County. Lewis testified that in the limo earlier that night, someone had tossed him a knife called the Chameleon 2. He said he asked, "Are you guys tripping with those knives?" and tossed it back. And he said it was Sweeting who had dropped empty knife packages on the ground as they exited the limo earlier in the evening. 3 men had knives that night. 2 men ended up dead from stab wounds. And the white suit, the piece of clothing most likely to contain physical evidence of what happened, simply vanished. Prosecutors argued that the bag dumped from the limo contained Lewis's clothes, presumably the white suit, which has never been located. Lewis himself, in his 2015 autobiography, confirmed he was wearing a white suit that night and acknowledged it was never found. In a double murder case, the disappearance of a key piece of potential physical evidence is not a minor detail. It is the center of every question that has followed this case for 25 years. On February 12th, 2000, just 12 days after the killings, Ray Lewis and his 2 companions, Reginald Oakley and Joseph Sweeting, were indicted by a Fulton County grand jury on 2 counts each of malice murder, felony murder, and aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. The trial began on May 23rd, and almost immediately the prosecution's case began to fall apart. One after another, the state's witnesses collapsed under defense scrutiny. Jeff Gwen, who had been with the victims, had told police on the night of the incident that he saw Lewis punching Lollar, but his testimony became inconsistent under cross-examination. The only witness who placed Lewis as actively involved in the fight was an admitted con man who was already in jail on identification fraud charges at the time of his testimony. Several weeks into the trial, Lewis's attorney negotiated a deal with prosecutors. The murder charge against Lewis was dropped. In exchange, Lewis pleaded guilty to misdemeanor obstruction of justice and testified against his co-defendants. He received 12 months of probation. The NFL fined him $250,000. In June 2000, Oakley and Sweeting were acquitted of all charges. 3 men went to trial for a double murder. None of them were convicted of murder. The killings of Jacinth Baker and Richard Lollar remain officially unsolved to this day. Less than 1 year after 2 men were stabbed to death on a street in Atlanta, the Baltimore Ravens played in Super Bowl 35. Ray Lewis was their defensive captain. He was the best player on the field. He was named Super Bowl MVP. Unlike every other Super Bowl MVP who goes on national television and announces a trip to Disney World, that honor went to quarterback Trent Dilfer instead. Lewis did not make that announcement. He continued playing. He continued dominating. He won a second Super Bowl in 2013, his final season, and retired as universally acknowledged as the greatest linebacker who ever played the game. Lewis reached an out-of-court settlement with the family of Richard Lollar, including Lollar's daughter India, who was born just a few months after her father's death. He also settled with the family of Jacinth Baker. The amounts were never disclosed. The families of both victims have said publicly that they believe there is more to the story than what came out in court. They have never received a full explanation of what happened to their sons in those 90 seconds. And because all 3 defendants were either acquitted or had their charges dropped, the legal system has no path forward. The case cannot be retried. Jacinth Baker and Richard Lollar's families have lived with that reality for 25 years. Here is what 25 years of investigation, court proceedings, journalism, and a dedicated true crime podcast have confirmed. Nobody knows exactly what happened in those 90 seconds. What is documented, 2 men died. Blood from 1 victim was in Lewis's limo. A bag was dumped from that limo during the drive away. Lewis's white suit was never recovered. Lewis pleaded guilty to obstruction of justice, meaning he acknowledged that he interfered with the investigation. 3 men went to trial. Nobody was convicted of murder. What is not known, who stabbed Baker and Lollar, whether the dumped bag contained Lewis's suit, what was in Lewis's testimony that he chose not to say on the stand, and why, with 3 men present, 2 victims, and multiple witnesses, no murder conviction has ever been secured. A 2024 true crime podcast called The Raven investigated the case extensively, visiting Akron to speak with the victims' families and uncovering a witness who had never previously spoken publicly about what they saw that night. The podcast did not solve the case. No one has. And the legal reality is that with acquittals already on record, the criminal justice system cannot reopen it. 2 families are still waiting for an answer that the legal system has decided it cannot provide. That is not a dramatic ending. That is simply the truth of what happened and what did not happen after the most scrutinized night in Ray Lewis's life. Ray Lewis played 17 seasons. He made the Pro Bowl 13 times. He won 2 Super Bowls. He was inducted into the Hall of Fame in 2018 on the first ballot by the very voters who knew everything about January 31st, 2000. The NFL made its decision about what Ray Lewis's career meant. The Hall of Fame made its decision. The courts made their decision. The only people who never got a decision were the families of Jacinth Baker and Richard Lollar, 2 men from Akron, Ohio, who went to a Super Bowl party and never came home. That is the part of this story that does not have a resolution, and that is the part that makes it impossible to fully close. If this video made you think, like it and subscribe. More stories like this one are coming.